right, everybody. Welcome back. We're going to do some ghost stories here. All right. It's going to be the first story we're going to do is the ghost deer of Roanoke. Now, since time immemorial and up to the beginning of the 20th century, the outer banks of the Old North State were remarkable for a profusion of grapevines. There is something about the air and about the minerals in the soil that seems to grow beautiful grapes on luxuriant vines. There was a time within the memory of men still living when the grapes grew down so close to the sea that the very ocean swells would break upon them in time of a storm. It was great sport for more daring of the young boys in that section to grasp a stout grapevine and swing, Tarzan-like, out over the ocean's shallows. Roanoke Island itself was partially covered in these vines. Now, one of the very oldest of these grapevines grew on the eastern shoreline of that island. It had a main stem as big as a man's body, and the place where it grew was known over many parts of the world as the Mother Vineyard. Now, slips of cuttings from this mother vineyard were carried to England and to France, and there planted and tended. Many of the slips are said to have been carried to California, where they grew and still grow in great profusion. Now, up until a few years prior to this writing, this mother vineyard was kept on a reduced scale, and some very excellent wine was made from its grapes. Now, the name is still carried on some of the highway signs on Roanoke Island, but most of the vineyard has now given way to a very beautiful housing project on the shoreline of this storied island. The subdivision is now known by the name of the Mother Vineyard, Sic Transit Gloria. Captain Martin Johnson, who used to run the steamer Trenton from Elizabeth City to Nag's Head and Manteo in the early 1920s, knew the ancient legend of that vine. It was a reverie-inducing fable. He would tell to the children of the passengers of his fine craft to while away some of the long hours as the Trenton churned her way through the cola-colored waters of Albemarle Sound. I heard the same legend related many years ago as a group of smallish boys sat around a campfire on the banks of a broad river where the Machipongo Indians once had a town. Okay. Now, they talk about goosebumps and furtive looks into the dark forest beyond the fire's circle of light. Huh. So yeah, I bet they was a little spooked and scared out of their skivvies. Now, the story begins in the time when the John White settlers first came to Roanoke in the year 1587. As you know, Virginia Dare was born. Both she and Chief Manteo were baptized into the Christian faith, and Governor White set sail for England to bring back supplies, but was unable to return for 3 full years. According to the legend, in the autumn of the second year of the city of Raleigh, hostile Indians under Chief Wanchese attacked the city and the fort. There had been many disputes by Wanchese and his followers with the leaders of the colonists. The fact that Governor White did not return as he had promised caused Wanchese to believe that the colony had been deserted, and he grew more insolent as the months went by. Finally, the chief swore a great oath to kill every colonist down to the last woman and child, and thus rid his island of the hated foreigners. Retribution was not to be feared from the men in the great canoes with wings, since they had obviously forgotten this little band. So it was that Wanchese sat down and planned the complete destruction of the white settlement and the murder of all its inhabitants. The raiders attacked at dawn, and without warning, several of the colonists were killed before they could reach the safety of the fort. But those within that rude battlement managed to close the doors and set up an answering fire with their muskets. Thus, the siege of Fort Raleigh began. Poisoned arrows were used by Wanchise's warriors, and every time a settler showed himself atop the fort, he was the immediate target for these deadly missiles. With the approach of night, fire arrows were brought into play. In the twilight, many buildings within the enclosure became flaming torches illuminating the desperate scene. Not knowing how long they could hold out and wanting to conserve their water for drinking purposes, the colonists attempted to take down the buildings that were afire and thus prevent the flames from spreading, while they replied with musket shot to the onslaughts of the Indians. Now, Chief Mateo had been on a fishing expedition that day, and Wanchese believed he would remain away for several days at the very least. The friendly Indian had taken a small party of his tribe and had gone southward in the direction of Hatteras. He had found fishing no good at all and was returning in the dusk when he saw the red glow in the sky. Now, sensing trouble from so large a blaze, he redoubled his speed, and as he drew near the fort, he began to hear the sounds of musket fire, as well as the shrill wild cry of the war-crazed attackers. Now, trouble had been brewing for some time, with the dissident braves under the other chief's command, and Mateo at once grasped what was happening. He realized that his small fishing party was badly outnumbered by the Indians, whom he could see leaping and screaming in the light of the burning buildings. Knowing full well that the colonists could not last until he went for reinforcements, he determined to try to help them escape. Now, gaining entrance to the fort by a secret tunnel which opened on the banks of the Sound, Mateo and his small band urged the colonists to flee under cover of darkness while yet they could. This they did. There was no time to bury their dead and no time to take more than the most meager personal belongings. Hurriedly, the survivors crept single file through the tunnel and down to the shore where the canoes of the fishing party were waiting. As Ananias and Eleanor Dare, with their infant daughter, Virginia, followed Mateo through the dense woods which screened the tunnel's mouth, Ananias bethought him of the agreement with Governor White that the colonists would carve the name of their destination on a tree if they had to flee Fort Raleigh. Okay. Now, thereby the rescue parties could the more easily find them. Now, over Mateo's strong protest, Ananias insisted on stopping before a great oak tree. He whipped out his sheath knife, quickly stripped the bark off a portion of the oak about head high, and began to carve upon the bared surface. 3 letters only did he carve: C-R-O. When a lone straggler from Wanchise's attacking force saw him, and with a triumphant scream, shot a poisoned arrow through his heart, killing him on the spot. Now, the return fire from Mateo's bow came only a split second later. It too was fatal, killing the attacker in his tracks and gaining a few more seconds of precious time before the besiegers would find that their quarry was escaping. Now, fearful that this new commotion might bring others of the attacking force Matteo now insisted on immediate flight. At first, Eleanor Dare was reluctant to leave the body of her fallen husband. It was not until Matteo reminded her of her duty to the infant Virginia that she tearfully agreed to go. Now, to reassure her, the noble chief made the sign of the cross upon his own forehead, and with his finger made the same sign on the forehead of the infant. Then, lifting his eyes to the sky, he pledged lifelong protection to the distraught mother and her baby. Now, swiftly they made their way to the waiting canoes as swiftly boarded them and pushed off into the night. The strong arms of Matteo and of his companions at the paddles sped them on into the trackless expanse of water north of the island. All night they traveled lest Wanchise's braves might pursue them in war canoes. As dawn was beginning to color the east, they came to the home of Matteo's people. Now later that same day, they were joined by the other survivors of the attack, and falling down in the homes of their rescuers, they slept the sleep of exhaustion. For the time being, their lives were safe. No force of Wanchese was strong enough to attack this village. The next day, a great council was held. Matteo called together the sub-chiefs of his people and pleaded with them to receive the white people into the tribe as their own. The Indian women, meanwhile, were much taken with little Virginia Dare. They could not understand her fair white skin, and they seemed fascinated by it. She was not dark-skinned like the Indians. Moreover, her hair was a soft golden color, such as they had never seen on mortal being. Little Snow Papoose, they called her, and wondered among themselves whether she would melt away with the return of the summer sun as the snow did. Now the council heeded Matteo's plea and agreed to accept the white colonists into the tribe as blood brothers. Now small cuts were made in the arms of each of the whites and of a corresponding number of Indians. Then the arm of each colonist was bound to the arm of his Indian counterpart, and the blood permitted to mingle, so that they did indeed become blood brothers. After only a few minutes, the bonds were cut and the arms freed. Thus did necessity make Indians of them all. All right. Now, with the practicality of people who live close to nature, the first thing the red man did was to help these newcomers build homes on their own, or homes of their own. Then they taught the whites to hunt the red deer and to fish for the great fish that swam in the sounds and bays. All this and much more the people of Matteo's tribe taught the colonists. Now the new arrivals, for their part, taught the Indians about the white man's God and about Christ and his compassion for all people. Now in time, they also taught them how to build a two-story house, a thing never before heard of by the Indians. The colonists also instructed their hosts in the use of a musket and showed them how to read or speak from a book, as well as how to use crossbows, breastplates, and helmets. All in all, it was an exchange of vast benefit to both sides, and the adopted members fitted well into the life of the tribe. The child Virginia Dare was the marvel and the cynosure of all the Indians. As she grew into young womanhood, her character and her personality developed to equal her beauty, and she became the favorite of all who knew her. With her fair complexion, deep blue eyes, and her hair the color of wild honey, she soon became a sort of white priestess to them. Winona Ska, they called her, and they listened intently as she told them of her mother's homeland and its ways, and of her beliefs in God and his mercy to all his children. Her most difficult task was to teach them not to worship her, for this they were most ready to do. They brought all their troubles to her and sought her aid in settling disputes. Her counsel was accepted by them on all manner of things. On many occasions, she settled the most bitter arguments simply by appearing on the scene, and with an admonitory hand making the sign of the cross over them. All the braves of Manteo's tribe loved Winona. They brought her presents of red deer and foxes and delicious fish, which they speared in the sounds. One of them, however, outdid all the others in his devotion and in his tireless efforts to please her. This was Okisco, a brave of noble blood who was only a year or two her senior, but already one of the mightiest hunters of the tribe. Being an Indian brave, he was troubled greatly by his belief that it would be unmanly to speak of his love, and yet he wanted most desperately to show this goddess woman how he felt. Each day he tried in some new way to show his love, yet never spoke of it. On one occasion, he even tried to affix to his canoe the wings of a huge goose he had killed, hoping that he would thus be able to sail the small craft as she had told him her people sailed. With such magnificent wings on his canoe, he thought he might sail a mighty journey eastward and find her people for her. Even though his fellow braves mocked him for this and for other similar acts, Okisco persisted in them, the only way he knew to show his love. Now, Winona, with the woman's insight, saw immediately what was going on, and she realized what the situation was. She was deeply touched. She liked Okisco very much, but felt no love for him other than she might have felt for a brother, had she been lucky enough to have one. And with an insight beyond his sex and beyond his years, Okisco contented himself with waiting. His hope and his belief was that someday love would awaken within the heart of Winona, and that she would then turn to him as her choice for a mate. Now, the fair beauty of Winona was not lost on others of the tribe either. Old Chico, the magician and shaman, looked long and searchingly at her. As he gazed, his youth seemed to return. The fires of long-forgotten young manhood seemed to rekindle in his breast. Yes, he too loved this young maiden. He loved her in his own way. He wanted her as his wife, and he set about to woo her. He would cover himself with bright war paint and place huge feathers on his head and arms. Thus decorated, he would strut and posture before her like some great outlandish bird. He would make great magic by rattling dried melon seeds in a gourd, and would dance fierce dances for what he hoped would be her pleasure. Kind-heartedly, Winona smiled upon his efforts, but mostly to keep the others from laughing. Although old enough to be her father, Chico grew wildly jealous of her. When he would see her smile at the young Okisco, his very soul would burn with jealousy and rage. Sick with desire and hopelessness, he finally determined that if he could not have her as his wife, then no man would. That's always a bad thing, isn't it? When it comes down to that. Okay, so although he had not had occasion to use his knowledge of magic in recent years, Chico had been a great magician in his day. He knew all the ancient spells handed down from his great-grandfather, who had also been the great-grandfather of the evil Wanchese. Chico knew the language of the lost spirits and could communicate with them. It was even rumored he could talk with the evil one himself. The old medicine man also knew many sinister potions and supernatural recipes whereby man might control a part of nature itself. And it was this course that he finally decided to pursue. By the use of his own black magic, he would once and for all ensure that Winona Ska would be his, or else she would be no man's. With a great deal of effort, Chico set about collecting from the waters as many pearls from the abundant mussels as he could find. Not ordinary pearls, mind you. For his dark purpose, he required pied or speckled pearls which seemed to glow like fireflies with their own eerie light, and to emit a sort of purple incandescence. Such pearls are known by magicians to be the souls of water nymphs who have disobeyed the king of the sea and for punishment have been sentenced to imprisonment in the shells of mussels. Now these water nymphs are very grateful when freed by mortal men, and they will do anything the liberator asks of them, whether the request be for good or evil. When he had a sufficient number of these liberated nymphs under his control, Chico revealed his plan to them. He told them what he plotted to do to the golden Winona Ska, and demanded their help in his scheme as the price of their freedom. True to their natures and obligated to him for freeing them, they promised to help him. Now, this being accomplished, Chico hid his pied pearls and set about to build a large canoe. He fashioned it with great care so that it floated with grace upon the waters like a large swan. It was a beautiful vessel. When it was finished, he asked Winona Ska to take a trip with him to Roanoke so the canoe would be blessed by the spirits there. He assured her that the trip could be made within a few hours, and that if they left at dawn, they would return long before the evening cooking fires were lit. Although she had been back to these scenes of her early childhood many times, Winona Ska agreed to go with Chico to keep from hurting his feelings. After all, the weather was beautiful, the water was calm, and the canoe was a new and fine one. She was flattered to be asked to take the trip in such a handsome craft. Now indeed was Chico's plot working to perfection, although the sea nymphs have no power on water, for there the sea king is the absolute ruler. Once on land, their powers are tremendous, and their magic is so fierce that only a greater magic can withstand it. Thus Chico had schemed to get his beautiful prey to go with him across the water and then to land a good distance from their village, so that no one might be near to witness the evil deed he had in mind. This ain't good, y'all. This ain't good. Chico had sung and chanted to each of his speckled pearls and had bathed them in a magic potion. He had then strung them into a lovely necklace, giving each pearl an explicit reminder of what he expected of her. As he and Winona Ska glided over the water toward the island of Roanoke, he gave the necklace to her, and she, greatly pleasured by the beauty of his gift, placed the magic necklace around her neck. Unsuspecting, she fingered the pearls and looked at them in admiration, for they seemed to glow with their own light. She would, of course, give the lovely ornament back to Chico. It was too fine a gift to accept from one to whom she was not betrothed. For the time, though, she would wear it and enjoy its unreal beauty before giving it back on their return to the home village. As they approached the sandy shores of Roanoke, Chico drove his paddle deep in the waters of the Sound and sent his new boat fairly flying over the calm surface, so that it ran half its length out upon the sandy shore before stopping. Light-footed and happy, Winona Scaw sprang from the canoe and onto the sandy beach. And there, after leaving just one human footprint, she changed into a magnificent snow-white doe and sprang away into the forest. Along the shores of that wooded island, the evil laughter of old Chico rang out and echoed back and forth among the pine and yawpon trees. Success was his. Winona Scaw had indeed now been placed far beyond the powers of any ordinary man to possess her. Thus was Chico's evil oath fulfilled. Meanwhile, in the village, the Indians waited long for Winona Scaw to return. No one had seen her leave with Chico, and Chico kept his own counsel. At his request, she had told no one of her plans, lest such a disclosure spoil the blessing of the canoe. Far and wide, the men searched for their lost high priestess. Many and long were the journeys they made, but all was in vain. Winona Scaw had vanished as though the very earth had swallowed her up. Finally, the search was given up, and she was mourned as forever lost. Shortly thereafter, there began a legend of a strange white doe that roamed the woods of Roanoke. The other deer looked upon her as a sort of leader. The story went and followed wherever she led. For furthermore, no arrow was able to kill or even to hit this white doe. Many braves coveted the white fur for a ceremonial robe, and some of the best hunters of several tribes had tried to kill her, but in vain. She seemed to lead a truly charmed life. When this became known, the older women of the tribe began to put two and two together. Firm believers in witchcraft, they saw the similarity between the vanished white maiden and the sudden appearance of the white doe. Since they remembered that old Chico had been a great magician, they gossiped that it must have been Chico and his black magic that had caused the disappearance of the girl. That Chico must have bewitched Winona Scaw and changed her into a white doe. It takes only one repetition of gossip to change. It must have been to it was. So was it then, as it is now. By the third retelling, it was being stated as a fact that Chico was responsible. Okisko heard this gossip, and his heart was glad. He also readily accepted this explanation of the disappearance of his beloved. Since Winona Scaw had been bewitched, perhaps he could find even greater magic to break the spell. First, though, the white doe should be captured for her own protection, and then the magical antidote searched for. In the days that followed, the young brave traveled often to Roanoke to try to capture the white doe, but without any semblance of success. He could not even come close to capturing her. No matter how cunning his traps, she would always avoid them. It seemed as though she could read his mind. On several occasions, when he caught sight of the splendid animal, she seemed to look directly at him with a great sorrow in her soft eyes before she turned and faded away into the forest. Almost physically sick with frustration, and believing now that he could never capture the white doe with the aid of the aid of a great magic, Okisko packed his canoe and traveled all the way to Wepomiok, the meeting of the waters. Here was a great Indian settlement of Okisko's nation, which was the home of a mighty magician known as Winalden. Unknown to Okisko, there had long been bad feeling and much jealousy between the mighty Winalden and the wily Chico. Winalden was only too glad to be the instrument whereby his enemy might be embarrassed and made to look foolish. When he had heard Okisko's story, he immediately agreed to help him. Now, taking Okisko aside into the forest where they could talk in secret, Winalden told him of a magic spring of water on Roanoke Island. It was a bubbling natural fountain of fresh water where the sea nymphs held their revels and where they met their lovers. So enamored were the nymphs of this spot that they had laid a spell upon the waters that would always make true lovers happy and secure. To drink of this magic spring was to have one's youth restored. He who bathed in the waters in the light of the full moon was given the power to undo all black magic and cancel out all evil spells. Now, having bathed in this spring when he was only an apprentice magician, Winalden knew of it, and he now prepared to share this knowledge with Okisko. Okay, first, he told the young visitor, you must secure a tooth from the fierce hammerhead shark. It must be a long and narrow tooth and very sharp. Then, within the triangle formed by the corners of the tooth, you must affix 3 purple muscle pearls, 1 to each corner and each made bright with much rubbing and polishing. To this shark's tooth you must affix an arrow shaft of witch hazel wood that has never before been used as an arrow. To fletch this magic weapon, you must pluck just 1 feather from the wing of a living heron. Then release the heron without further harm and hide the arrow from all human sight. Let no one gaze upon it, and tell no one of your purpose. Then, when the moon is full, take the arrow from its hiding place and submerge it in the magic waters of the enchanted spring on Roanoke. There, let it remain for 3 full nights while you stand guard. When the sun is rising on the 3rd morning after its submerging, take the arrow in your hands thus and point it toward the rising sun. Pray to the Great Spirit that your arrow may free the gentle Winona Ska from the evil charm and restore her to you. With this arrow you must then hunt the white doe. When you have brought her to bay, take care to shoot the arrow straight into her heart. Do not fear, she will not be harmed by your arrow. If your aim is true, the evil spell of Chico will be ended, and she will resume her human form. Thus spoke Winalden to Okisko, who heeded every word and wrote it upon his heart. The young lover then made haste to return to his native village, and thence go to Roanoke, where he began the preparation of his magic arrow. Each step was followed with care, and the arrow was finally completed, exactly as he had been instructed. It also happened that at this same time, the neighboring chief, Wanchese, son of the old chief Wanchese, called for a truce among all the tribes and announced a mighty hunt to celebrate the ending of hostilities. He proposed the smoking of the peace pipe among the nations, and then a joint hunt in which the quarry would be the fabled white doe of Roanoke. The brave who killed the white doe would be named the greatest hunter among them all. Tired of senseless fighting, the other chiefs agreed, although they only half trusted the word of this younger Wanchese. They remembered too well the treachery of the old chief Wanchese, his father, and they feared the son might be too much like the father. Since no harm could come from an attempt at peace, however, it was decided to go along with the young Wanchese's plan, keeping a sharp eye out all the while for any sign of betrayal. Now this young Wanchese had a gift from this father, a silver arrowhead from which Queen Elizabeth herself had given him upon his visit to England. The young chief fully believed that this lustrous arrowhead held some magic power. He planned to use it to kill the white doe himself and thus bring to his house the fame and the glory that such a feat would ensure. The hunt was duly organized, and only braves of noble blood were allowed to participate. On the appointed day, the princely hunters took to the woods. Okisko with his magic arrow, and Wanchese with his silver-pointed dart, though neither knew the other was near. Both these mighty hunters spied the white doe at the same instant. She was standing perfectly still and gazing at the ruins of the ancient Fort Raleigh. Aiming carefully and with bated breath, Okisko and Wanchese each drew his powerful bow, and at the same instant shot his special arrow at the beautiful target at a range so close it seemed impossible that either could miss. One arrow carried with it hope, love, and compassion. The other bore malice, greed, and cunning. The hunters were equally skilled and equally powerful, and both arrows pierced the heart of the white doe, making the shape of a cross as they did so. As the fates would have it, Okisko's arrow arrived at the target just a split second before the dart of Wanchese. To the amazement of Wanchese, a silver mist seemed to envelop the white doe. As before his very eyes, she changed from a doe to a beautiful young woman with long golden hair and bright blue eyes. To the anguish of Okisko, as soon as his beloved resumed her human form, there was the silver-headed arrow piercing her heart. From its wound, the bright red blood flowed down the side of Winona's skull. Restored to her human form one instant, but mortally wounded the next, she slowly collapsed and fell prostrate on the forest floor. Now Wanchese fled in terror at this sight, but Okisko ran to his beloved. He found that his magic arrow had indeed pierced the heart of Winona's skull, but had done no harm, and as Winauden had predicted, had accomplished her transformation. Wanchese's arrow, arriving a heartbeat later, had pierced the human heart and had broken the shark's tooth point of the magic arrow. In one wild and desperate attempt to save his Winona skull, Okisko seized his broken arrow and ran headlong back along the forest trail until he reached the enchanted spring. Here, in broad daylight, he plunged his magic arrow into the bubbling fountain and besought the Great Spirit that his beloved be spared. As Okisko knelt and looked at the splashing waters, the spring began to subside and to disappear into the ground. Before his anguished eyes, it dried up and vanished completely. Simultaneously, the arrow became fully rooted in the ground where the nymph's enchanted spring had been. From the top and sides of the arrow, little green leaves began to appear. As they grew and unfolded before his eyes, they became the leaves of a grapevine, and the witch hazel staff turned into the main stem of the vine. When he returned to look for his Winona Ska near the ruins of the fort, she was nowhere to be seen. But yonder, in the gathering dusk, he thought he saw the flash of a white deer bounding away. At least, a part of his prayer had been answered. The white doe was restored to life. But never again could she be transformed into her human form. This day she is said to roam the woods of Roanoke, and of the mainland as well. as impervious to modern guns as she was to bows and arrows. To try in any way to harm her is said to bring on the worst of fortune imaginable. Over the years, the grapevine grew and flourished, and the main stem became in time as thick as a man's body. Thus was the mother vineyard started, and thus was established the parent vine that has furnished slips and cuttings to be transplanted all over this country of ours, and in England and France as well. It was claimed for years that on a dark and moonless night you could, if you listened very carefully, hear the lovely Winona Scaw crying for her lost love. There were even those who said that the blueness of some of the grapes was the very blueness in the eyes of that lovely maid who was born here many centuries before.